right, let's get going. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Merrifield. I am the chair of the North Central Region Water Network Leadership Team, and I will be moderating this webinar today on multi-state water work in action. Thank you all for joining us, and I want to say how honored I am to be hosting this 100th episode of The Current. So the North Central Region Water Network grew out of collaborations that began way back in the 1990s. In 2014, the network came together under the leadership of University of Wisconsin at Madison, and with funding from all of the North Central Regional Extension directors. The goal was to enhance connectivity with Extension and with partners around critical water issues. From 2014 forward, 12 leaders from the universities listed on this slide have worked together to fulfill the vision and mission of NCROWN. So over the last 100 episodes, The Current has been a key avenue for sharing information and connecting all of us around these and other related priority issues. 12,348 people have tuned in over the course of this webinar series. The audience has included land grant researchers and educators, agriculture and conservation professionals, municipal, state, and federal agency staff, elected officials, members of Native nations, and representatives from utilities and community development and planning organizations. Oops. Today, the network is an important resource for all of us, not just through current webinars, but also through a host of programs and teams and upcoming events. So as you see here, our program teams are really producing and really active. The Soil Health Nexus is hosting a conservation finance training. The Algal Bloom Action Team is hosting a webinar on lake ecology. The North Central Region Climate Collaborative is hosting an Ag and Climate Conference. The Climate and Water Equity Workshop, which hosted its first session last fall, is planning a second workshop again this fall. And the Confluence of Watershed Leaders is hosting a series called Good Idea Shop Talks. All this is to say that what started over 20 years ago and was codified 10 years ago has produced a thriving network to address some of the most pressing water challenges that are affecting our region. But as we all know, showing is better than telling. So that's what we plan to do today. All right, we have three speakers who will share their stories about working together and how their collaborations have expanded our capacity and extended our reach. We'll hear about the Confluence of Watershed Leaders from Catherine DeLong, Conservation Drainage Network from Jane Frankenberger, and the upcoming North Central Region Ag and Climate Conference from Monica Jean. If you have any questions during our presentations, please put them in the Q&A panel, and we'll answer those questions at the end of all three presentations. If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat, and we will try and help you. With that introduction, I want to stop my share and turn the floor over to Catherine DeLong. Catherine is a water quality, there you go. Now you can see Catherine. Catherine DeLong is the Water Quality Program Manager at Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, and she is here to discuss the Confluence of Watershed Leaders. Catherine?
All right, thank you for the introduction, Lisa. I will share my screen. Everyone just ignore the extremely busy desktop that you see there for a minute. I'm working on it. Okay. That look all right?
Looks great. Looks great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks again, Lisa. Thanks for having me on. I am here today to talk a little bit about the Confluence for Watershed Leaders, which is a project that I'm a very small part of. And so I look forward to highlighting the team that's involved. And I also just want to acknowledge that it's just a great honor to be on the 100th webinar of The Current. So let's get going. So I'm here today to talk about the Confluence for Watershed Leaders. This is an online community, and it's a place for watershed leaders to connect with peers, share advice, share opportunities, And largely a big goal is just to feel part of something bigger, feel that they're not alone in the work that they're doing. So before I dive into a little bit more about the Confluence, and I'll talk a little bit more about the audience and the geographic scope of the community, I do want to start out, though, by talking a little bit about why we felt that this platform was needed. Why do we need an online space where watershed leaders can engage with each other? My guess is that everybody on this webinar already knows that water quality is a big issue. We've had decades of great research and innovation and technology highlighting the issues that we have with water quality and helping us think about solutions. But in many states, we are falling short of our water quality goals. And I'll use Iowa as an example. So I work for Iowa State Extension. And our state, like many states along the Mississippi River, put together a nutrient reduction strategy. This was our statewide strategy to help reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus leaving our state and ending up in the Mississippi River and eventually in the Gulf of Mexico. And so Iowa has made progress in terms of reducing the amount of phosphorus ending up in the Mississippi, but we have really not made progress on nitrogen. And so there is still so much work needed. So research has shown us, the changes to land management that will improve water quality. What we really are struggling with is adoption. We're just not having enough farmers and landowners and communities adopt these practices that will help keep our water clean. And so we've really made leaps with technology and practices. We have a lot of great information telling us that, what are the things that we need to do to improve water quality. We have the science, we have the technology. We know what the solutions are. What the central argument of the Confluence is that what we really need to invest in, though, to accomplish our goals is people. People are what make the difference. Having people on the ground who can work with farmers and landowners and communities to help put in these practices and to help build these trusting relationships with those stakeholders is really where we think we need to put a lot of effort in. And this is not just our argument. It is also reflected in the literature. So this is from an article that was done by Chris Morris and Jay Arbuckle at Iowa State. They did a survey of farmers across Iowa, hundreds of farmers, asking them about their conservation practices and if they'd adopted conservation practices and more information about who they are. And what they essentially found is that the greatest predictor of conservation adoption by those farmers was if they had a long-term relationship with a conservation professional. So if they had a trusted advisor who they felt they could turn to, that's what made the biggest difference. It wasn't having, a conservation plan with the NRCS. It wasn't access to cost share. It was having a trusted individual who they could turn to. That's what made the biggest difference for them. And so this really is like our central argument around the work that the Confluence does, is that we need these people on the landscape to help farmers, landowners, and communities. And we need them on the landscape for a significant amount of time. A lot of times these positions, it might be an entry-level job or it might be first job out of college. But we want these people to stay in their positions, and we need to give them benefits too to stay in those positions. But we want them to stay in these positions so that they can form those long-lasting relationships with farmers and landowners, build that trust, and then eventually work with them to put in these conservation practices. And so this is what the Confluence website looks like. And so you can go to watershedleaders.org. And you can also see the QR code there in the bottom left. Please check it out. And I'll talk in a little bit about how to join the Confluence if you're interested in that. But the Confluence is really centered around peer learning and professional development for watershed professionals, people who work with farmers and landowners and communities, as well as farmers and landowners who are actively involved in watershed efforts. And a little bit more about the audience. So we say it's for watershed leaders. So who do we mean when we say watershed leaders? We are thinking of those people who work in the watershed context. So watershed coordinators, planners, managers, any sort of conservation professionals, people who work for the NRCS, extension, soil and water conservation districts, counties, nonprofits, private consultants, all are welcome. As well as farmers and landowners who are part of watershed or farmer-led groups. And I think that's a really important group to include because previous research has also shown us that the best messenger to farmers and landowners is farmers and landowners. They prefer to hear from each other. And so helping them become that leader and connect to more people is really important. So as of last night, when I checked, the Confluence has 624 members. And the geographic scope, the primary area that we're drawing people from is the Great Lakes, Mississippi River, and the Red River basins. And so, sort of the Midwest and the Mid-South. And just to explain why that is our geographic scope. So I mentioned that I'm a tiny part of the Confluence. There are lots of other land grant universities as well as nonprofits, agencies, and alliances that have been involved. So we get together, we think about how we can really invest in human capital to improve water outcomes. And the Confluence is one of the ways that we've done that. And so you can see the list of institutions that are involved. And as you can see, I think most of them are sort of centered in the Midwest and Mid-South, and that's why we kept that geographic focus. So if I've convinced you and you really want to join the Confluence, it's very easy. So you can go to watershedleaders.org, click the Join Us button, and then you'll put in a couple pieces of information and then be let in. And so, I'm an example of someone who I don't lead a watershed project or anything like that, but I support people who do that work. And so there's space for people who are doing that work on the ground in this community, but also people like me who really, put together resources for watershed coordinators and trainings like that. And so there's a space to share that information with this group as well. So I'm positive that many people on this webinar would be a good fit to join the Confluence. So the platform, if you're curious that this is on, is called Mighty Networks. It's like a social media platform, but without the ads, and it's really more focused on conversation and networking. But if you go to the Confluence, you'll see it looks, it has a news feed sort of element to it as well. So you can see what people are posting, look at different topics you might be interested as well. So if you join the Confluence, some of the ways that we think it is useful and we want you to engage is to ask questions related to your watershed work. We really want this to be an active community where people ask questions and support each other. So give and receive advice and feedback, share jobs and funding opportunities, learn about upcoming events, find nearby leaders, who you may not be connected to, and plant the seeds of future collaborations. One last point on the Confluence that I did want to highlight is, so if you go to the website watershedleaders.org, you'll see that there are other areas that have additional information. So you can click on Learn. And if you click on Watershed Academies within that, it will take you to a listing with lots of great information about different watershed academies across the Midwest and Mid-South. So these are trainings for those watershed professionals. You can also click on the Resources tab and it will take you to this page. So this page is open to everyone. You don't have to have joined the Confluence, but it gives it's a great listing of different resources for people who are working in watersheds. And so you can see here at the top, it's got a DEI guidebook for conservation professionals that was created by the Soil and Water Conservation Society, but it's also got resources on the financial implications of conservation, water quality monitoring guides. So just like a treasure trove of information there. And the last thing I wanted to mention, so the goal of the Confluence is really to be useful to people who are out there on the landscape working with farmers and communities to put in these practices. And I wanted to give you an example of somebody who is the ideal audience for this and who actively participated in the Confluence. So this is a post that Laura James made. Laura was a watershed coordinator in Beaver Creek in Iowa. She's moved on to another position, but we did a presentation with Laura a couple throughout the summer asking, of the different things that the Confluence has put together, what's been the most helpful? And so these are some of the things that she got from participating in the Confluence. So she asked the news feed, I'm wondering if anyone has done general outreach directed at landowners in their watersheds. Specifically, she was putting together a letter, and if anyone had done that before and asking what sort of things they would include in the letter, things to think about. And she got just a great amount of responses. So Laura is an example of someone who, this was her first job out of college. She didn't have much of an agricultural background. And she was put in this job and told to, get these conservation practices out on the landscape. And so having a community that you can turn to was really important to her. And so she said she found a wider sense of community, a broader perspective on watershed efforts, a feeling that there are people out there looking out for watershed professionals, which is the one I think is the most touching, and people to share successes with and get ideas from in an online network. So this is really like ideally what we're doing with the Confluence is connecting people to each other. A lot of these projects are very similar to each other in a lot of ways. They don't need to recreate the wheel. What they really need is a network of people who they can turn to so we can crowdsource a lot of the things that we've already learned. So that's what Laura did, and that's really what we hope to accomplish with the Confluence. And then I just want to end by saying a big thank you. You saw that there are lots of people who are involved in the Confluence, but the number one person who I just wanted to acknowledge is Jenny Seifert. So Jenny Seifert is with the North Central Region Water Network, and she really is our fearless leader in terms of making all these things like the Confluence for Watershed Leaders happen. So just want to call out Jenny and all the great work she's done. And I will now stop sharing my screen so we can go to our next presenter.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Let me share my screen again. And I am privileged to introduce our next speaker, Jane Frankenberger. Jane is a professor in the Agriculture and Biological Engineering program at Purdue University, and she is going to discuss the Conservation Drainage Network. Jane, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. As I get my screen shared, I want to also say that I'm delighted to be here today. And as someone who has been around since the origin of the North Central Water Network many years ago, I'm honored to be on the 100th episode. So I'm happy to talk about the Conservation Drainage Network, and I've added a subtitle to better explain what I'll be talking about, which is how research and extension and agencies and industry are working together as a multi-state effort to advance agricultural drainage and water quality in our changing climate, in our changing environment. And yes, I'm Jane Frankenberger. So I thought I needed to start with a few slides to talk about what is conservation drainage, probably something that's not familiar to everyone on this call. First of all, it's important to understand that our conventional drainage infrastructure is designed to get rid of water as quickly as possible. We've got the tile drains under the field and the ditch drainage, and the goal and the emphasis is that after it rains and the soil is wet, to move water out as quickly as possible, rather than storing water where it falls or delaying getting rid of it. And this method of getting rid of water as soon as possible leads to several issues. So one is the nutrients. We know that our drainage system adds nitrogen and phosphorus to the stream system and causes algae blooms downstream. The second is that we don't have any opportunity to decrease flooding. It's not clear that drainage increases flooding. It may under certain circumstances, but it's certainly not decreasing like if we had more water storage. And then third, when it comes to the drier times in the summer, we don't have water stored that could possibly increase crop yields. So the broad solution is storing water in the landscape, which addresses all three of these issues. But when we look at a typical Midwestern landscape, here's an oblique photo of Indiana, it's really not clear where we could store water in a landscape like this. So that's what I and many others across the states, agricultural engineers, agronomists, and others have been looking at for a number of number of years. So for example, in this field, we could hold back water in the drainage system itself and a practice called controlled drainage. I'm not going to talk much about the practices, just give you an idea of what we're talking about. Another is a practice called saturated buffers, which, as it sounds, saturates the buffers and then can store a little water. And then third, we can actually store water in a reservoir and then recycle it back as irrigation. So any of these practices could be the topic of another webinar, but for today, I'm just going to mention that these practices are there, and they were the focus of a large project called Transforming Drainage, which was funded by USDA NIFA and ran from 2015 to 2021. I had the privilege of leading it along with Ben Reinhardt, and that's what I was originally asked to talk about on this webinar. And I love talking about it, but because it's finished, I said, no, I'd rather talk about the Conservation Drainage Network instead, which is how we're keeping the ideas and the products and the advancing of conservation drainage going through a multi-state network. So I think it fits well. So I plan in this presentation to explain how the Conservation Drainage Network came from the Transforming Drainage project and other activities and has developed into a robust and active network today. And many colleagues, those in the photo and others, are working to ensure that it will last into the future. So before I do that, the Transforming Drainage project had university and ARS collaborators from 10 states and quite a number of collaborators, as you see here. The vision was that we would implement design and new agricultural practices that our methods of designing would be transformed to include water storage and even water recycling. So the three practices I just talked about, the saturated buffer, controlled drainage, and drainage water recycling, would be included more often in the landscape. So that project, we conducted field research, we synthesized it, we made tools available, as I'll talk about in a minute, so that more people could put them into practice, and then we advanced education and extension. And also another goal along our way was to strengthen and broaden the network of researchers and agencies and the drainage industry so that the practices we're advocating would actually become implemented more widely. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about the lasting impacts of the Transforming Drainage project, and this will lead into the Conservation Drainage Network as at the end. So the first is that we had 39 different sites. Some were already monitoring these innovative drainage practices before we started. Some continued during the project. And the requirement of all these sites was that we would put the data into a publicly accessible database. We didn't collect all the data the same because it came from different projects, but we did share all the data and we put it at the Ag Data Commons, which is part of the USDA National Ag Library. I always like to bring this up. It's not really key to the conservation drainage network, but I think this idea of sharing data, making data findable and accessible to people is the future. And so I hope that everybody listening thinks in some way how to make their data accessible in the future for future analyses. So this is what we did. It's got a DOI and anybody can find it and use it for advancing the science. We also published the results in Nature Scientific Data Journal. So we feel like this is really a major advance. We, of course, published a lot of papers along the way showing that these drainage storage practices can significantly reduce nutrient losses while maintaining or increasing yields across the Midwest. So that's the first impact, the research and the shared data. The second is that we contributed to several NRCS conservation practice standards. As many of you know, that's the way conservation decisions actually get made, that when NRCS implements practices that have standards, and many state agencies do as well. So we contributed to 2 of them, and that continues to be very important, these NRCS standards. Another is that we produced 8 professionally produced videos that can be used in extension activities. I won't take much time, but you can just play a little bit. I play snippets sometimes to show what we did, and those are available. But I'll go on. Fourth, we developed a number of tools and that can help in informing and transforming drainage. One of them, for example, is a mapping program that shows the likely extent of agricultural drainage. You can click on any site and get an idea of whether it probably is artificially drained. And then you can also get the totals by county or watershed or state. It's an estimate, but we think it's a good estimate, as good as any out there. And that's just one of the 8 tools that we had. So again, this is not a presentation that focuses on the products, but just to give you an idea of the kind of things we did. And so we put it in an extension publication. And fifth is just a number of other extension products that we did for outreach. So we had a number of extension publications that are still available. We developed something called the Conservation Drainage Media Library, where a lot of people shared their photos of drainage, both conventional drainage and these newer types of drainage. And so that anybody who is looking for photos or images or design tools can use these. And we're now thinking about expanding these again. But we've been told by a number of people, most recently at EPA, that they really appreciate using these photos because it's hard to find if you're not out in the field. And then we have a website that provides access to all the outputs. So this remains, even though transforming drainage is over. So that's what I'm going to say about that. But the 6th output, and this was a goal from the beginning of that project, was that we would develop a network of researchers and agencies. This is state, federal, and even local conservation agencies and the drainage industry that would continue this work beyond the end of the project. So that's where we are now, 3 years beyond the end. So many of us worked together to form this entity called the Conservation Drainage Network. And I'm very pleased to say that it's active and robust and is making an impact now. This graphic shows the types of entities that are members of it. I'll come back to this: research, education, state and local agencies, international, private, NGOs, industry, and we all come together. And here is our website. So various members of the team led the development of this new organization, and we are getting committees going. It's an ongoing effort because nobody has time, because we're not actually funded directly for this effort, but it's something that so many people care about, and it does strengthen our individual efforts. Okay. I do want to mention that there's another type of foundation we had besides the Transforming Drainage Project. There were a number of prior entities, which I don't have time to talk to a lot, but one was the Agricultural Drainage Management Systems Task Force, and that was formed as part of a USDA effort to link the work of ARS, NRCS, NIFA. There is also the industry-led group called the Agricultural Drainage Management Coalition that's very important, and it's, you know, their dedication to this work that has continued to make this very successful. And then we have a multi-state research and extension activity called NSERA 217. That's been going on for about 20 years. We keep rewriting proposals, and it's very active and has really helped as well to have this network going. So all these partners work together to make the conservation drainage network what it is. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit. Oh, before I do that, we have an organizing committee that runs it. Coincidentally, we're just about to meet right after this meeting. It's led right now by Yeba Kjaersgaard of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and Keegan Kult from the industry-led Ag Drainage Management Coalition. But then you see many types of, many different universities from Oregon State, Purdue, Ohio State University, Michigan State are on this leadership team. We have the private sector, we have advisors who are federal agencies, and we meet regularly to keep this organization going and advance our work. We did just have a very successful 2024 annual meeting in Ohio that had a record-breaking 170 attendees, if we combine the in-person and virtual. Vinayak Shetakar was a key part of the organizing, and these are also his wonderful photos that show both the meeting part of it and the field tour. We had 2 field tours, and that was very successful. So in closing, I just wanted to talk again about how this works. This was a slide that we developed a few years ago, especially by Keegan, to think about how this network that's multi-state and multi-type of organization works. So the industry and various conservation agencies provide input to we who are the research and extension community discussing the research needs, and then the research goes back out to these agencies, and then they work together. The agencies have the programs, and the industry drives the participation. So it's ongoing, and I hope that this will last a long time as an example of a multi-state effort that continues to advance something that's important to us, the agricultural drainage that protects water quality in our changing environment. So thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Let me pull up our third speaker. Before I introduce our third speaker, though, I do want to invite you to put any questions you have in the Q&A. We'll be going over those at the end of all 3 presentations. So put those in the Q&A, and I will be sure to get them to the right speaker at the end. All right, our final speaker is Monica Jean. Monica is an extension field crop educator at Michigan State University. She serves the Saginaw Bay Watershed region, and she is going to tell us more about the Agriculture and Climate Conference coming up. Monica?
Thanks, Lisa. Hello, everyone. I am going to cheat a little bit. Instead of prepping some cool slides, I didn't prep this actually. Someone built this sweet website. So we're going to use this today. I figured this was a way better way than me trying to pretty much do the same thing. So I am here today because I'm a representative of the North Central Climate Collaborative. My side job, or really my main job, is being an agronomist in that Central Michigan region of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. But I really enjoy engaging and learning from our colleagues who also participate in the North Central Climate Collaborative. And we are going to be hosting a conference that we would love for all of you, and, you know, bring your friend or your farmer friend along with you. and we're gonna have some really awesome presentations and keynotes also of people trying to figure out how we're going to adapt and mitigate as we confront our challenges with our changing climate. And so this is going to be taking place July 31st through August 1st. I will make sure this link that I'm currently sharing gets put into the chat box for all of you. And we're going to be in Peoria at the Civic Center. And so this website is pretty well set up. I want to note that our deadline is actually this Friday to submit your abstracts. So please make sure to put those in. At the end of this site right here is the download for the call for abstracts. It's very well detailed with a template you can copy and paste into a Word document to complete with instructions on how to complete them. I just did mine today, actually. So I can tell you it's functioning and is working well. Besides that, of course, there's the register here. We do have an early bird registration of $75 with a deadline of June 30th. It gives you a nice time. So if you submit for your abstract, just know that if you do get chosen to come speak or present, right, you need to register. So that is an expectation of everyone listed as the main authors on those abstracts. Besides that, there's a couple different places to stay that are offered. There is also travel support, and that deadline is coming up quickly as well. And so we do have a pretty good pool, and we'd like to get those out to everyone that needs it so that they can access this conference and participate. So please let us know. We really would like to see those funds spent out. If this all didn't entice you, if you're like, I don't know, do I want to go to Peoria? You know, like, is that really what I want to do? I just want to mention that at the Civic Center, they don't just host us. Alice Cooper will be at the end of the week. And this is your time if you would really like to see that happen. Come to the conference, stay an extra, I think it's a day or two, check out the area and see Alice Cooper. Pretty reasonable tickets. So with that, I said I'd keep it short and sweet. That's all I have.
Thank you, Monica. I am intrigued to see the Venn diagram of climate, ag interest, and Alice Cooper interest. It seems like there'd be a lot. So, all right. Thanks so much to our three presenters. We have some questions in the Q&A. You still have time to submit your questions if you would like to do that. But let's get started with what we have for now. So the first question is, farmers and landowners in a large portion of our watershed, let me start that again. Farmers and landowners in a large portion of the watersheds of our states have demonstrated refusal to adopt conservation practices, regardless of coordinators or the amount of financial incentives. Our lakes and rivers are choking with algae blooms and nitrates. What are options for non-voluntary approaches to conservation compliance that will work for our states? And this is a listener from Iowa. And Catherine, I think this was direct. It was submitted when you were speaking, but I wonder perhaps all of you would have some comments on this.
Yeah, I can start, but I'd love to hear what other people have to say. Yeah, it's tough to answer that question because we have a voluntary system for dealing with this. So it's hard to know what would work if we didn't. But I do think that there are lots of things that make a difference to that adoption that I didn't even get to. I think having that trusted source on the ground is really important. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of turnover in this position. We don't often offer them the best benefits, things like that. And so how can they form these trusted relationships with farmers and landowners if, it's just a starter job and then they need to go to a new job that has healthcare? So I do think that is still really one of the biggest issues that we need to think about. But, also in Iowa, another big issue is the amount of people who farm the land who don't own it. In Iowa, it's 58% of land is farmed by people who don't own it. And so We've seen through survey work too that someone who doesn't own the land is less likely to, sometimes less likely to protect it with conservation practices. They don't necessarily want to make that investment. And they don't know if they have the support of their landowner, or maybe they don't ask or they don't communicate about it. So I think there's lots and lots of things going on, but the main message I do want to lead with is that in terms of the Confluence in our group, we really think that people part is really important. We think if we have people on the landscape, visible people on the landscape who can stay in those positions long enough to form good relationships with farmers and landowners, I do think that's what will make the difference.
Catherine, Jane, or Monica, you want to?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
point out the issue, as Catherine, is among other issues that there's so much landlords that are not the same as the operators, and that's a big challenge. I would just point out to the person who asked the question that the Farm Bill is being debated in Congress right now. This is where the decisions are made. We have, as a nation, emphasized voluntary practices, but things can change. I'm sure the people listening on this webinar have many different views, and I would encourage people to contact their congressional representatives with their views because things can change.
Good advice, Jane.
Yeah, I have a little bit of I guess, a different opinion. So I am in an impaired watershed. The Western Lake Erie Basin, of course, is pretty famous in the southern part of Michigan, and I'm in the Saginaw Bay region, which is also an impaired watershed. As the data has showed up, of course, we know agriculture is not the only contributor to the phosphorus. We have primarily a phosphorus issue within our watersheds. But the problem is like the legacy phosphorus that exists in our system makes it extremely difficult for us to understand what is defined as a successful practice for reducing what we're putting out versus what isn't. And so I also feel like there is right now, it is unclear on what practices is a very clear like win for those farmers to adopt and invest in. And it's even hard for us when we're doing cost share sometimes to completely know what they should invest in for their land, because we are still trying to figure out what will reduce our different phosphorus pools successfully within a watershed. We definitely know there are some, but even within like the use of cover crops, it is debated on the frost-free cycle and the release of that phosphorus within our system. The research on nitrogen could be very different. I apologize. I am way more informed on phosphorus just because of our state. But I do know with the problem in Ohio, they've been putting considerable amount of money towards it and do have some regulation, and it's still been difficult on trying to really move because of that legacy phosphorus within the system.
Great, thanks, Monica. All right, our next question is for you, Jane. With the Conservation Drainage Network, do you have any wetland or riparian restoration along with the drainage BMPs?
Since we are focused on drainage and sort of mitigating the nutrient impacts of that, we haven't worked on riparian much, although unless you call something like two-stage ditches that could fall into that category. Some people certainly work on wetlands. Wetlands is an excellent way to reduce the nitrate losses from drained land, but it hasn't been as central a project in that, but we do discuss that and the impacts and share information on the wetland benefits.
Excellent, thanks so much. A comment, but I guess something that might be worth commenting on. Catherine, you mentioned the Morris and Arbuckle study regarding how influential those ongoing relationships are. This listener asked about sharing that study with lobbyists, sharing the study with nonprofit conservation organizations who lobby for funds might be a good plan. Is that something you've considered, or? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's interesting, like even within our own community, we're still trying to like get this message out there. Because we do tend to mainly emphasize paying for practices as being the most impactful thing. Yeah, two comments on that. One, this group, the Confluence, has sort of spin-off groups on it as well. And Jenny Seifert and I and others are working on that exact thing. We're trying to essentially put together almost like a marketing or an advertising campaign to help state agencies, nonprofits understand the value of having conservation professionals on the landscape working with farmers and landowners. So that is something we're thinking about. And then the second comment would be about the conservation practitioner poll. This is a poll that went out. It was led by the Soil and Water Conservation Society as well as Iowa State Extension. And it was a poll that went out to conservation practitioners across 6 states in the Midwest, asking them questions about, when do you feel most impactful in your job? What do you like about your job? What do you think is going to make the difference for conservation adoption? And the overwhelming, strongest response was, we think the thing that will make the biggest difference is if we get to spend time out in the field talking to farmers and landowners. I think we do have an issue where you're having a lot of these conservation professionals who have great expertise, but they're holed up in cubicles in offices. And so we think having them out on the landscape really makes a big difference. But so those results from that poll are being communicated in DC. So Claire Lindahl, the CEO of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, for the past couple of years has gone to DC with those results to encourage our legislators and our agencies to invest in conservation professionals. And we did just put out another poll, I think that closed this week. And so we'll have more results coming in on that. So you'll be able to find that on the Soil and Water Conservation Society's website. But yeah, totally agree that we need to get the word out. Maybe more people on this webinar can help us do that.
Excellent. All right, here's a question for all three of you. This person mentions that they love the idea of networks of experts and sharing information among the states. I'm interested in how much of our respective state primacy agencies are participating in these networks. Do the agencies review the data and the tools that have been developed? In other words, are the state agencies supporting these extension efforts? And Jane, you spoke a little bit to this. Do you want to start?
Yes, and as we know, there are many agencies within each state, and I just use the very broad term agencies. Certainly the departments of agriculture are the most active in several states. They do participate if that's a state in the states where they have I don't know, the potential to make decisions about practice implementation. Minnesota comes to mind as certainly the one that's very active. Another thing is that in the Gulf hypoxia task force states, and that would not include Michigan, whatever agency is responsible for that, for the state's participation, is often very active because this falls within their thinking about their state's plan. US EPA at the national level has been active, but not all the state agencies. For example, Indiana, it's IDEM that that implements the Clean Water Act, and I would say they have been less active. So it's generally the one that implements conservation practices, agricultural practices, but I don't know what you're getting at. If we could reach out to others, maybe that would be a good strategy. It's been pretty much whatever agency is interested and can get funded to come to the meetings are the ones that are the most active.
Excellent.
I was just going to add too, for the Confluence, I don't think we have any state agencies that are directly involved. They weren't part of the sort of organizing committees around it. But I would say that they are actively involved in terms of participating. So the example I gave of Laura James, so a watershed coordinator, she was employed by the Department of Natural Resources. And so we have lots of state agency employees who participate, but they weren't involved at the organizing level.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I had one more, I guess, scenario. So we have gotten money before, that
Uh-oh.
EPA money that was able to come through the university, through our Institute for Water Research, but then the cost share portion was still handled at our local conservation districts. And so we did established, I was trying to pull up the website here, the Bayway, or we also refer to it as farming water quality farmers for our Saginaw Bay region. And so we set up cohorts of farmers, and they were definitely supported by, I would say, that plural agency term, and Farm Bureau and Extension ourselves. It was a group effort in order to get those up and running and continue to be supported. Supported. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Monica. Our next question is building off of our first question about encouraging adoption. Are states struggling with landowners who do not leave BMPs in place over time, especially in context of fluctuating crop prices? And do you have any tips and strategies to encourage landowners to maintain BMPs over the long term? Jane, I think that's probably for you.
Oh, I was going to ask Catherine.
Oh, okay.
I can go first just because. So landowners are top of mind for me right now because we have a new program where we've launched started last week, that is for landowners, and specifically kind of trying to target landowners who don't necessarily farm the land. So it is definitely a big issue, and we're trying something, a sort of unique approach with this program where we had all the landowners who are participating take a really thorough assessment. And so we asked them questions about, how important conservation is to them, how important is profitability, all these other questions, trying to help define sort of their identity a little bit. And then we will be adjusting our outreach and education based on their responses. And so if they said that if we put them in a small group that really prioritize profitability, then we're going to really lead in with those messages. And then there's also a peer learning component to it as well. And so in the research to getting this project going, was just looking at a lot of the issues with getting the word out to landowners and helping them adopt these practices. And I feel like the big conclusion I came away with is that it's just so complicated. Some of them, they own the land with 10 siblings, and it's not necessarily they don't want to do conservation, it's that they have to figure it out with all these different people, and there's a component of inertia there, or they don't know how to talk to their tenant about it. Maybe they're scared to bring it up, or they don't want to make the life of their tenant harder, because a lot of these are really long-term relationships too. So I'm not sure I have an answer yet. We hope that this program works and that it can be something we continue to do every year. But I do think that this is an issue with putting in practices and then not keeping them. There was a really interesting article several years ago in this Journal of Soil and Water Conservation looking at CRP, Conservation Reserve Program acres that had been put in CRP and then were eventually taken out. And so really questioning, like, if we're just doing this for a snapshot in time, are we really having the impact that we want to have? So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but I think we need to think about it.
Excellent, thanks. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that
I listened to the
conversation?
social
Okay.
scientists on that one. I have no particular expertise.
All right, thanks. Next question is, water challenges look different depending on the scale. Many see local impacts on local watershed health, but multi-state impacts can be difficult to relate to. How do you see working at the multi-state level as helping address challenges across states?
That's an interesting question, Ken. I think that with the conservation drainage network, there's still so much unknown about the effectiveness and the costs that one of the primary reasons to have the multi-state network is because the individual sites are far apart. It's not like cover crops where you have so many that, in a local area, you could see enough impact. So we need to work over a large geographic area just to have enough sites to be able to understand the practices and their effectiveness very well. But I think you're right, absolutely, that people are relate less to the impacts. We all know that the Gulf of Mexico is not that motivating to farmers in the Midwest, but hopefully at least being able to hear from other farmers who are implementing these practices, which may be, quite a distance away. Hopefully that's helpful. And certainly for us researchers, it's helpful to get enough data to make any generalizations about their effectiveness.
I was gonna add, yeah, that's an interesting question. I do think, with the Confluence, I think one of the things that people get out of it, and this is something that Laura communicated too, is just this feeling that they're not alone, that they're not the only one waking up every morning worrying about water quality and habitat and soil health, and feeling that you're part of a bigger movement. I think a lot of the people who take these jobs are, optimists and environmentalists, and feeling that they're part of something bigger than just their small watershed is really meaningful to them. So I think that's probably one of the things that moves across scales.
All
And
right.
I want to thank you for that, Catherine, because it's true for me. It's wonderful for all of us to be part of something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. With that, I want to thank our speakers today. If you are interested in reaching out to any of them, here are email addresses. Know that you will have access to this recording in the coming days. And thank you all for joining us.